In this video, I'm having a play with my fourth 10-inch screen 8K printer. And despite it being what I think will be the last of this format printer I review, it was actually the first to be released. Although I believe there's a slight up revision on these printers, although it's not really disclosed on Phrozen's website, this is more of a Rev 2 version of the mighty 8K. So that means it boasts a couple of new and advanced features that some of the other printers don't have. So if you're new here, hi, I'm Ross, this is Farhammer Videos, and let's go and have a play with the Phrozen Sonic Mighty 8K. Now, I'm not the channel that likes to go through the unboxing and talking about that experience. You can see it here, you take it out of a box, and I've said the same thing with all of my other 3D printer reviews. But this one was different. Now, I don't know if it was some kind of jealousy that led to this event or just how couriers tend to operate nowadays, but this box did not arrive in the best condition. It had clearly been dropped on one of the corners, and on top of that, it had been left out in the rain or somewhere wet for quite a while because one of the sides of the box was absolutely soaked through and then left to dry, or at least get to the point of damp, before it was delivered to my house. So I could look at this in a negative way, but it did give me the opportunity, just like my last Phrozen printer, to play around with, disassemble and reassemble some of the internals of the printer, and that showed me the build quality of this machine, which was absolutely excellent. And that really is what Phrozen do. They take the existing printer range, and you can actually sum it all up by saying they do what everyone else does, they just have that little extra of quality added to every single aspect of the journey. Now, I did want to knock this printer for the inclusion of a cheapo USB drive that came with it, something that I've knocked all of the 3D printer brands for, and something I was surprised by because my mini 8K actually came with a SanDisk one, but I quickly realised you don't actually need this. And every other item in the box was just top quality. Even the included scraper has a laser-etched Phrozen logo across it. And yeah, that has no tangible benefit, but it's just that extra level of quality that gives you the confidence that these guys are putting more effort into their products than any other brand. And that doesn't just stop at the stuff included with it. So, onto some of the call-out features of this printer that make it different from the rest. Spec-wise, its print volume is 21.8 by 12.3 by 23.5 centimeters. To operate it, you have a 5-inch high-resolution touch panel that's really responsive, and this really is high resolution. Unfortunately, this is the part that I needed to replace in order to get the printer working due to the courier damage. The most important feature is obviously the 8K 10-inch LCD screen, which is used for curing your prints. But I have to stress here that this doesn't come with a screen protector, there's no glass overlay, you're literally looking at the polarizer, so I highly recommend you get one in case you get fingerprint scratches or worse yet, resin on that glass. If that happens, you're looking at getting a brand new screen. And something that none of the 10-inch 28.5 micron printers have is the inclusion of a built-in webcam. This is the feature that I believe makes the Mighty 8K more of a revision too, because I don't think the original Mighty 8Ks actually shipped with a webcam. Oh, and don't you worry, I'm definitely going to talk about how this webcam's integrated later on. It's also worth noting that the printer supports a Wi-Fi connection, and you can configure this on the UI, but the way this is set up on the actual printer, it's not internal, it's just a USB Wi-Fi dongle. You also have the option of a direct Ethernet connection if that's available to you, but the benefit of either of those and the included 3.5GB of memory internally means that you can just send prints directly to it, and you don't actually need the USB drive that comes with the printer. But it is worth noting this is the only one of these printers where the USB port is on the front, and I know some people are fine, you can use an extension cable, but I've got a few printers, and if I haven't got a few printers, maybe I've got a printer and a wash and cure, and I want to put things at the sides of my printers. I can't do that, or at least I have to space them out if there's a USB drive or some kind of extension cable in the way. So I'm very much in the camp of USB sockets on the front please, thanks Phrozen, 10 points from me just for that. So as I mentioned before, I had to take this printer apart just to get it working, and when I took it apart, not only did I notice that the front LCD panel had started coming off, but half of the cables inside had actually been pulled out of their sockets and the glue had been snapped. So I don't know whether the couriers were playing football with this thing, but bloomin' heck, it's been through an ordeal. There's 2 bolts on either side, and you can remove these with the included Allen keys that come with the printer. Once you've taken those 4 mini bolts out, you just pull the front plate off and everything's accessible from there. Once I finally got this replaced though, and it actually booted up, I was greeted with the out-of-box experience and setup. And this is exactly where Phrozen are miles ahead of the competition. You see, for the last few years, printer manufacturers have been playing this one-up leapfrog game of who's got the bigger printer or the higher resolution. But I've been saying for a long while now that we really don't need that anymore, at least in the last year since we got the Mini 8K and anything with a 22 micron to a 35 micron pixel size. For somebody who prints miniatures, that range is more than enough if you're wanting something the quality of, say, Games Workshop style models, because we don't need higher resolution than that typically to get the detail that you have on those size of models. But it's the convenience features we need, things that this does, and this gives you an out-of-box experience like no other. All other printers will give you functions like print or raise and lower the bed, but when you turn this on for the first time, and you can reset it and go through it again, and well, you're going to need to if and when you do a firmware update, but it actually walks you through every step, including putting the build plate on, all the way down to leveling it and lowering it, testing the screen in various ways, all the way up to printing your actual exposure tests and telling you how to validate them and tweak your settings accordingly. If this is your first 3D printer, I don't think they could make it any simpler. Quite literally, RTFM and M is on the screen. And just screaming quality further, the build plate is not only laser etched, but it's laser etched, deeply coloured. It's absolutely gorgeous to look at. And despite me printing about 20 or even 30 separate prints on this, scraping it with a metal scraper, I couldn't see any scratches or defects in the hardened steel surface. When you're levelling the build plate, it just attaches to the Z-arm with one large bolt, but it also has the 4-point screw connection, which is my much preferred method of leveling a build plate because it gives you more control, and these generally tend to be more secure than the ballpoint axis that you get with the likes of Elegoo printers. One thing the printer doesn't tell you, which is just something I've learned from experience, when tightening these bolts for the build plate, I would concentrate on doing it in alternating screws. So if you start at front left, then go to rear right, and then front right, then rear left. Doing it this way and giving it a quarter of a turn at a time just prevents you from adding too much pressure to one side, causing it to shift out of alignment, which is the last thing you want. You want to secure this once and then never have to change it again, which is pretty much what I did here, although the first time I did it, it was a bit too loose. Whilst it will walk you through an exposure test, I still prefer to do my own. Personally, the one that I use by Photonsters is just more accurate at measuring prints and much faster than the one created by Phrozen that you print on this printer. But before I jumped onto that, I started having a play through the menus, and absolutely everything can be tested in here, and it's so intuitive. You can turn the fan on and off, test the LCD, the Z-axis, or even turn on the camera to make sure this is working and get the camera's display on the display for the printer. No other printer in this range, or any of the big brands, has this much packed into the features of the actual printer itself. It's even got a pretty animation as a screensaver when the printer's been left idle for some time. And it improves on basic features like the other brands that would have you moving the Z-axis by multiple increments of 10mm at a time. This one also has that, but it includes a sliding scale on the right hand side of the screen that lets you just drag a bar up to the point where you want the Z-arm to raise to, and it'll go to that point. I honestly can't explain how much of a pleasure it was to just use this printer and realise that, yeah, you can do a lot more on these LCD screens and operating systems that are built in than just a few functional buttons. So because this video is sponsored by Phrozen, and thanks Phrozen for the printer, don't worry, I can say what I want to say about it, I also decided to use the Phrozen 8K grey resin, mainly because they provided it and it was free. I've made my opinions about this resin known, so please go and watch my other video about that. But the TLDR is, I like it, it's good for quality, just not so much for miniatures if you want to play them in a game because it's a bit brittle. That's the whole story. Still though, it's a good video, go and watch it. So I printed off my first exposure test and gave it a quick rinse in methylated spirits. When counting the number of holes and posts, I noticed that there were more posts than holes, which is telling me that this is overexposing my prints. And normally I'd print a few of these, but a lot of people online have been saying that the Cones of Calibration by Table Flip Foundry is an absolutely fantastic exposure finder, specifically if you're printing miniatures, because this tests the supports more than it actually tests exposure being perfectly balanced. I'll do a separate video explaining why perfect exposure and best exposure aren't always the same thing, especially for printing miniatures, but for now, just go with me on this and I'll explain the whole point of this exercise at the end. So I printed a few of these Cones of Calibration, 3 in fact, and the whole point is the supports on one side are meant to succeed and the supports on the other side are meant to fail, and that'll give you a good balance of exposure whilst also showing you that large components, or at least these cones, will be able to take the stresses of being pulled from the build plate. After about 3 prints, I determined that 1.5 seconds was the best exposure time for 30 micron layers. I'll put my settings up on screen, but I need to stress that in order to achieve the same results as me, you need the same environment as me. So my ambient temperature in the room is normally around room temperature, so give or take it's around 20 to 22 degrees, but sometimes it can drop at night as low as 15, which is why I try and focus my prints during the day. Now, after I'd printed these Cones of Calibration a few times, I then went and reprinted another of the Photonsters exposure tests at the same time, and when I counted the posts and the holes on these, it was ever so slightly overexposed, but I had the same number of posts as holes, telling me that that's a good exposure for 3D prints. So whilst yes, the Cones of Calibration are a really good test, what puts me off is the fact that the Photonsters flat test took only 15 minutes to print, or 15 to 20 minutes, whereas the Cones of Calibration took 1.5 to 2 hours to print. So yeah, it's a great way to validate things, but I'm going to stick to my flat plate because I can get my exposure dialed in much faster printing these. But having this dialed in, my first print bed, which was full of models, was a complete success, and this included my usual Wolverine bust that I like to print in order to compare to other printers. That one's by Drafnia Studios, and these Plague Demons are from One Page Rules, which I've hated on in the past, but I do like their sculpts, and as being an alternative for Warhammer, they are the go-to. Unsurprisingly, the print quality of these models is absolutely incredible, and this is before I've done any refinement on the printer. This is just finding my exposure time, slicing it in Chitubox and clicking print. Having both this resolution and the convenience of this build plate size is exactly why these are my favourite printers. You can print the equivalent of a Games Workshop army box on a single build plate, and then whilst you're painting that, you can be printing your next 3. Now unfortunately my next print was a slight failure, and what this meant was some of the resin actually stayed stuck to the bottom of the FEP. Okay, technically it's PTFE, but FEP is now stuck in my head. The clear film that goes at the bottom of your vat, it was stuck to that. So this gives me the opportunity to share a tip that a few people have commented on my previous videos. Instead of emptying the whole vat and then cleaning it off and disconnecting it and then lifting it up and risking getting resin everywhere, just take a bit of old support and put this flat against the film at the bottom of your vat. Make sure you push it down slightly and then run the LCD test to light up the whole screen. I think it's normally called vat cleaning on some printers, or LCD test. Whatever it is, just fill up the whole screen with light so that the bottom layer of resin cures and sticks to this piece of support. All you need to do then is lift it out, let the excess resin run away, and go and chuck that whole piece in the bin. You're ready to print again. And another useful tip that was also shared on multiple videos and on Facebook and various other places' comments was re-leveling your bed. Once again, normally you need to empty out the vat, move the vat out the way, loosen the bed, clean off the bed, put the paper down again. Nope, skip all that. You see, the point of that paper when you initially level is just to emulate it being the clear film. So all you need to do is have the clear film between the screen and the actual build plate. The good thing is, it's already there, at the bottom of the vat. So if you don't mind getting a little bit messy, I mean, you're wearing gloves anyway, just do the leveling test, but do it with the vat in place. Make sure before you tighten it, you push down on the actual bed so that the resin trapped under it doesn't lift it up a bit, but that's it. You can actually do the leveling with the vat in the printer. So in the last few weeks whilst I've been testing this, I haven't actually removed the vat once. I haven't needed to. And this is my favourite part of being a YouTuber. Getting comments and tips like that is something that I haven't come across in various groups in the last 4 years. Thanks guys. This is why you should comment on people's videos. Right, so before I get on to the print quality and what the final results look like, let's talk about Wi-Fi and this webcam. So, the first thing you need to do is get this printer connected to your Wi-Fi network. So, make sure you plug in the included USB dongle, the USB Wi-Fi dongle, into the back of the printer. Setup is super easy because, again, it's so intuitive. Just click on network, select your Wi-Fi network, and then put in your password. As soon as you do that, you'll be connected to your Wi-Fi. To send things to the printer, just go to your Windows computer or Mac, go to / its IP address or the printer name, and you'll be presented with a folder once you log in, and your username and password are also very obvious and clear in the settings, and then you just drag things into the folder. From there, you'll then be able to choose to print them directly from the printer's front screen of the interface. Right, this webcam. So when I went to set this up, it said this feature's not available and it's coming in August 2022. Well, it's now February 2023 and I've had this printer for a couple of months. And looking at various forum posts, I think it was around November, December when the firmware was finally released that actually gave you access to the webcam features of the printer. And you know, the inclusion of a webcam in a printer is a really good idea, right? You should be able to remotely check in on it and make sure that things are still progressing well. And with things like the Bamboo Labs X1 FDM printer, you can actually get it to create a time lapse with every single 3D print it does and upload these to a shared cloud hosting platform for you so that you can download and watch them. Because let's be fair, 3D time lapses of printers is just something really cool to look at. So excited with that potential, I decided to update the firmware in order to get this working, and this is fairly straightforward. You download it from the internet, you put it on the USB drive, and you reboot the printer and then choose to print the update file. So it'll actually do an update whilst it's restarting, and then you print the update file, the RBF file, and this will actually perform the firmware update. Unfortunately though, the firmware update will wipe any settings and configuration from the printer, so you will need to go through that whole startup sequence and re-level the bed again. So if you've already leveled the bed, it's great that I just showed you that tip on how to do it whilst the vat is still in the machine. But once this is complete, you can then use the Phrozen Go app, which is another app that you can tie to your printer by simply downloading the app for your phone and scanning a QR code, and this will let you monitor your print's progress and even give you updates to say that a print has finished. And it will keep sending you that update every half an hour until you go in and acknowledge it. And as for the camera, what does this give you? Nope, not a time lapse. What it means is you can go to a print that's active and then choose capture, and it'll send a signal to the printer to capture one image and then send that back to your phone. Yay! So okay, it's already not the best feature, but to make things worse, this is only good if you've got a bright enough light in the rest of your room or a light pointing through the UV filter that, you know, is commonly known as the lid. If, like me, you go to bed at night and turn off all the lights in your house, then when you actually try and take a photo and look at this, you can't see a single thing. And the same is true even if you've got bright lights in the room, but you're printing a very large object. It just blocks all of the light from the camera, so the best you can get is a bit of a silhouette. So whilst the concept's good, this bit's kind of feedback from Phrozen that, sorry guys, I know that the printer has never actually raised in price, it's the same price now, but people are going to be looking at this printer thinking some of the money they're spending on it, because it is quite expensive, the price is fair, I get that, but it is still expensive, and people will look at spending the money on this thinking, why am I paying for a camera that has very little to no use? It really wasn't worth including for this much value. If you want to deliver something with this, the possibilities are exciting and endless, but deliver it or don't include it at all. Sorry guys. So for the print quality, well, first up I'm going to show you the Wolverine model that I always print, and I'm going to say the same thing I've said with all of these 28.5 micron printers. You can hardly tell the difference between any of them, nor can you tell the difference between it and something printed on the 22 micron printer, which is the Sonic Mini 8K. Don't get me wrong, the differences are there, but you really need to zoom in to see them. So what's the point? Well, to point that out, I've actually printed some miniatures, which is the whole point of this channel anyway. So I spliced together some parts from Atlan Forge to make this bust of what looks like a Space Marine, but it's not a Space Marine, because if it was a Space Marine, that would be an IP breach. So this isn't a Space Marine, it's a future warrior who fights in space with shoulder pauldrons and a big chest. It's not an eagle, is it? It's a bull with wings. But the point is, I wanted to make something that was relative to the sort of quality that you want to compare to and may want to print yourself. And then for fun, I stuck my head on it, which was something I scanned using the Revo Point Pop 2, which actually comes bundled with this printer, so watch out for a future video on that. And I've actually printed over 70 of these so that I can review the Army Painter Speed Paints 2.0 in various colours in something that looks like, well, it's relative to something you would paint with various textures and cloths on it. So I printed these in 3 different ways. The first one was raw, I then printed it with 2x anti-aliasing, I then printed it with 2x anti-aliasing and 2x image blur. But when you compare the 3 models from a just normal arm's distance or even holding them close to your head, I actually got them mixed up just trying to film this part of the video, you can't really tell much of a difference at all. But when you go in with a macro lens, you can start to see some of the voxel lines that are printed and are apparent on the rounded surfaces because it builds up squares in layers. As we apply anti-aliasing, these get softened, and then when we apply image blur as well, these are all but eradicated. But if you look on things like the lower part of the torso or on the shoulder pads or even the face itself, you can see that as we add anti-aliasing and image blur, it actually softens all these out and all but eradicates them. Nothing but the tiniest and thinnest of paintbrushes would pick this out, and only then would they actually come into account if you are doing techniques like dry brushing or washes, because the washes will go into the recesses and the dry brushes will pick out the extremities. So you can reduce these significantly, but if you go much further than this, I think the sweet spot really is 2x image blur and 2x anti-aliasing. Any further and you will start to really soften the detail on them, which for this scale of miniature isn't too bad because you can always paint it back in, but really I don't think you should go any further than this, because if you do, then what is the point of having a printer with this much detail in it? You can get the same from a 35 micron printer like the Sonic Mini 4K. And whilst, yeah, look, you may be looking at this printer and not be interested in printing miniatures, but I would still argue that if you can print miniatures and get them down to this level of detail, anything that you can print larger than that, problems like layer lines and voxel lines will be much less of a problem anyway. So if you start with miniatures, everything else is just scaling up. For me though, I've scaled down, and I've actually printed this head which is compatible with Warhammer Space Marines and various other things, and yes, it is my head quite narcissistically, but I'm off to Adepticon soon and I'm going to be taking 2 or 3 bags of these with me. That's over 2,000 heads, which will be fun for giving away and also for a future video. So if you want to come and pick up one of these free Space Marine heads and you're at Adepticon, then just come and see me. I'll be over at the Artis Opus booth and helping them demo their dry brushes. And that's all, guys. Please let me know what you think down in the comments. Is this a printer you're interested in? Is it overpriced? I don't think it's overpriced. I think it's worth it for the price it is, but is this beyond your budget of what you wanted to spend for what you get out of this printer, or is it right on the money and exactly what you're looking for? Let me know down in the comments, and please give thanks to our patrons who you can see up on the screen now. Perhaps consider joining them and you can get your name up in lights too, and it also helps us making future content for this channel. Thanks again, I'll see you next time. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Fohammer out.